So we're still waiting. I'm not sure who's on the phone there. There's Michael. Hey, Michael. Michael's muted. And then I think we should have Elisa here eventually. And Laura's there, ready and willing to take minutes, right, Laura?
So willingly. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I'm here. I'm here.
And then Elisa, we're still waiting for her.
I just admitted.
There you are. Yeah. And then I'm not sure if Jenna's going to be joining us or not. Our newest employee started today. There's Elisa.
Hello, everyone. All right. Have we kicked off yet, OB, or are we ready to get going?
I'm ready.
All right. It is 4:02, and we will call to order with Bob O'Brien and Rick York. It's here, Josie Kovish, Makeda Barkley, Steve Evers, and myself. So we have 6 of 6, full quorum. Lovely. So we will begin our meeting with citizens to be heard. Are there any people here who'd like to speak? Since we don't have any public hearings, anyone who'd like to speak on anything on the agenda or anything that's not on the agenda, you can put a comment in the chat or come off mute. All right. Looks like we are good to move on to ex parte communications and disclosures. Again, no public hearings, but does anyone have anything to disclose as far as any of the discussion items later today?
Where's your phone?
Rick?
So if we're discussing the, what are we going to call it? The Scenic Resource Protection District around 313 and 191, my company owns a bunch of that land.
Rick. All right. Seeing no other comments, we'll move on to approval of our meeting minutes from July 26. Has everyone had a chance to review them, and does anyone have any comments? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Makeda. Any discussion? All right, all in favor of approving the July 26 minutes, raise your hand.
Aye.
Say aye. Steve?
I'm going to abstain. I didn't
Abstain. So
I
all
didn't
in
attend
favor?
that. So
Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, so 5 in favor with 1 abstention, and we will move on. So most of our meeting today will include discussion items. Staff has included a list of items that they'd like to bring up. I personally have one that I'll raise under future considerations, but I would be interested in having a bit of discussion around, and that is just related to looking at our general plan in light of the recent floods, our flood management in Spanish Valley, making sure that's revisited. And Trish is not able to join us, so I'll ask John to give the County Commission update as well. So John, I'm actually just going to let you drive us through most of this, since this is largely staff's list, and it'll help us sort of stay on target to the things that we can help you get achieved and accounted for.
Well, I don't want to run without you, Emily. You'll be reining me in from time to time, I'm sure. So that's good. Well, we had a rather long commission meeting. I won't go through every one of these, maybe just hit some highlights. There was a road maintenance agreement that was approved by commission for the Arroyo subdivision, primarily because of federal law, the way it works. And that's a operation maintenance agreement for some of the major roads that are there, not all of them. There is an auto show coming up, the Old Spanish Trail Arena. I think it's an annual event, and that was approved. Airport water feasibility study with Armstrong Consultants was approved. Approved a 2-year lease for the Moab Express for a kiosk in the airport terminal. This is Andy bringing this forward. Advertising with Emory Telecom, there was two, I think, commercial advertising opportunities that were there around motorized transportation and how that was going to work, and trying to educate people on responsible recreation. So that was approved with some discussion. 2-year contract crowd riff for the travel council in the amount of $36,000. So that was approved as well. Appointed a new 3 volunteers for the travel council advisory board. That was approved. So a lot of the pretty long agenda here. And so I'm just kind of hitting the highlights. The actual section 9 of the land use code, those changes as far as section 9 and part of section 10 were postponed, primarily because the commission still wanted to revisit the fact of how the final plat process is done and handled. They're thinking about leaving that, at least that's part of the administration approach, is to leave it within the county commission for final approval. So we'll see how that goes. We're doing a bit of research to see what other agencies are doing in the state. And I bounced this off of Michael as well, just to see if we can get some information back. So we're hoping to get some more information on that before it proceeds next week. The Dalton Bird subdivision, or rezoning, I should say, that's across from, I think, near the Wingate, on that, it's part of that split zoning area there too, which you turned down, commission turned down, planning commission. I think that was in April, correct me if I'm wrong, March or April. That was turned down by the county commission as well, with some discussion. And the final plat for Puesta del Sol was approved. So that went through fairly straightforward. A temporary land use regulation for Thompson Springs. You can see a pretty busy agenda, which actually puts a moratorium on development until we get the report back on the water analysis that's being done by an engineer now. So potentially no longer than 180 days, but really there's a moratorium for any development that's related to water. So obviously people could still build garages or sheds or things that doesn't involve water. So that moratorium has been fine. I think that's signed by Mary now. What's another good highlight here? I think that's pretty well it as far as areas, unless anyone has any questions. Those are most of what was there. We did have a workshop again with the commission during the afternoon session, 1:30 to 3:30 on the strategic plan. So we made some advances. We've come up with 7 values and 1 vision statement, which they all had homework to do, is to take each one of the value statements for each commissioner and then redraft their sections and then suggest a vision statement that could be redrafted as well. We did a PEST exercise with them. So politics, any external influences from politics, economic, social, or technology, that was discussed, and we updated that. I'm not sure if the planning commission is interested in seeing what some of that data looks like. It's all public, so we could always share it with the commission anyway. If you're interested, we could just copy you with what kind of work in progress is right now, or it's up to you. You could wait as well too, or we could do it both times. So, and we got another workshop planned for next Tuesday, same time, 1:30 to 3:30. It makes for a long meeting, but the commission is really committed to getting a strategic plan ready that we can plug into the general plan, and that will help frame a lot of the direction, within, strategically, not so much politically, but we're taking a look at strategic objectives, how they can be merged with the other elements of the general plan. So it's pretty crucial to move ahead with that. So that's pretty well, that's all I had there. Emily, unless anyone has any questions.
Generally speaking, as far as any data sharing or outcomes, I'm very curious to stay close to where the commission is as we look at some of these longer term and more strategic either plans or decisions that are coming up in front of us, simply because to the extent we can stay aligned to where the commission is as a body, I think it'll help us bring the most value to those conversations and ultimately, hasten getting value out to the community. So just at a high level, would be really curious to stay close to those outcomes and any data being shared.
Okay, so if you're okay with this, Emily, I'll send you an email and then maybe you can just share it with the rest of the commission.
Perfect. Wonderful. Any other questions for John related to the county commission update?
I am curious about the final plat process, just having participated in that, personally, and having some opinions on that. It sounds like they're seeking more information on what other agencies are doing throughout the state, is there any way to stay abreast of what's happening with that in terms of when they're gonna take that up again? Or has it just been like postponed to the next meeting, or is there, a time limit?
There was a
or
couple of
a
grammatical,
timeline?
if I could, through Emily, where there was a couple of grammatical changes that needed to happen, and there was some tables that needed to be corrected as far as reference concerned. You made a couple of changes, Planning Commission did as well, which were fairly minor. That was part of the discussion, but also it was really focused around whether the county commission's ready to completely let go of the final plat process. And I think there's a bit of comfort level they're not clear on. I think some of that's administration, not just the commission. So we wanted to get more background. I think legislatively, as far as we're concerned, there's no problem moving ahead with final plat approval completely administratively, because it is a technical review process. It doesn't involve policy. There's no legislative actions that are necessary there. I did go out to the listserv, the Utah Association of Planners listserv. So there's quite a few members. I just did it again today. I haven't heard anything back. I might have to make some phone calls, or maybe Michael can help me rattle some chains out there to get some responses back. But we've looked at a couple of sites, and the ones that we've looked at do have a final plat approval through the commission. But we need to look at more.
And
That's-
no, it just seems to me now, this of course was long enough ago that it's a little fuzzy in my head, but there were a couple of things in that kind of final plat thing that looked like they took some judgment. And when I actually said yes to that, that it could be just administrative rather than having to go through the council. The one little bit of reticence was it seemed like there were a couple of things in there that had just judgment. Is that right, John?
Well, it really is infrastructure. It's not related to the general plan. It's all land use code. So it's all already in code. There is some potential for a plan, plan unit developments or any rezoning are always done before the plat anyway. So those are legislative, but an HDHO is legislative because that's changing use, change in density. So, you could argue, let me take a conditional use permit, for example, the public hearing process is supposed to be taken away because it's not even in state law. So that's a fairly easy one, but there's some concerns that maybe the conditional use permit discretionary application of criteria could be judgmental. There are some judgmental elements, but most of them have to have objective standards with them. And the plat process is the same. They need to have objectives, any plat notes that's there that deals with either geotech or floodplain or access or deed restrictions. Those are all technical. You could say there's judgment for all of those kinds of things, but I think it's pretty narrow.
One last question, and I know you have this slated under discussions for future consideration. So if you'd rather we saved it until then, that's fine. But the mutual meetings between the city and the county, Grand County, San Juan County, maybe even some of these sort of recommending bodies from either place, is that something that the commission is actively pursuing, or do we have a status update on that? Because I'm really curious to move that forward, given so many of the cross-boundary issues facing us now and also in the short and near term.
It was more of a staff incentive to think about how the commissions could interact in a constructive way. I don't mean react, but interact and think in terms of how we could work together on mutual planning. I think we've got an interest from San Juan County in doing that. And I think the city's interested in doing that. And I know the county commission's interested, obviously, in joint commission meetings. They already have a joint council commission meeting. I've not been to them, city council meeting, but it's kind of springing off of that kind of reference. So we actually have a dialogue around strategies, long range planning, initiatives, RFPs that are out there, transportation ones out there. We're hoping to put a land use one out there too. And there's a lot of commonality because the borders are pretty artificial. And we want to make sure we're comparing notes and working together as best we can. It can always be a better working relationship. So it was more of a staff-driven one, Emily. I'm not sure historically whether the commissions have had that. I don't think they have, which is kind of strange to me. But it's one of those initiatives that we'd like to keep going. Not, it wouldn't be, obviously wouldn't be every month, but it'd probably be either quarterly or semi-annual.
Or even just to try and have a summit. I mean, with the aim of one meeting would be helpful, just to get us started and start to build relationships. But I'm eager to see that move forward and hope we are successful, that staff is successful in making that happen. And it's true, we don't have a at least county to county, we don't have a history of it. We did work quite closely with the city as we were looking at the overnight accommodation overlay standards specifically. And so I know that, even just in the last year and a half, we've had some close communication, and it's benefited us to be able to make it easier for residents as well as for the staff of both bodies. Cool. All right. Thank you. That's all I wanted to know about that, was just status.
Okay, you want me to keep going here?
Let's move on. Yeah.
Yeah, so the status is updated, filling the vacancy. I'm going to pass that to Elisa. I think you were going to get something together on this, Elisa. I know there's 2 applications that we know of officially. Michael Mancuso was one, or have I got that right? And
Actually, John, I don't have any information on that. I haven't been looped in on any of the correspondence regarding the vacancies and filling that. So I just thought, I know you'd mentioned that we have some people that want to be, interviewed and considered for that. So
there's a lot of people have been knocking on the door. I think there's 2, Ben and Tony, I think it is. Tony Ancuso, if that name rings a bell. So I think those are the 2 official ones. I don't think I've seen anything since. They just closed on Friday. So we need to get that to the commission for you to consider, because you do the interviews, as you probably know, and make the recommendation to the county commission. So we'll set those up for you. Is there anything that I should know about that, Emily, that I may not know as far as aligning that? I know you only got 6 members now, right? You're down a member, so.
We are down a member. So I think as long as we have some sort of cap on when admission, when people can apply, ideally we get interviews as quick as possible, and we tend to do interviews the day of, and then vote, and then send that recommendation to the county commission, and ideally time it so that whoever is selected can join us for our following meeting.
Right.
But we can offline on that. But I know I'm eager to see us come back to a full quorum of 7, and then that spot, my spot, and I think one other are also all up in December. So if people are interested in and they want to apply, or they're not sure if now is the right time, there will be another opportunity this year.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll need to update you on the current status of renewals, and then make sure that's clear. And we probably would set the interviews at a normal planning commission meeting, which would be 2 weeks from today, if that's not too far out there, unless you want to have a special meeting.
No, I don't think it's necessary to have a special meeting. Let's plan on that. And we look forward to meeting our applicants.
Okay, I think there are 2, and there might have been more. There's been some inquiries, but I'm not sure if officially they've applied or yet or not. So usually you give that a couple of days anyway, just to make sure you've got everybody.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. We wanted to have a general dialogue around the Scenic Resource Protection District in the north, which Rick has mentioned as well, especially around the Moab Giants area and the development to the north of that, which would be Reed Pendleton, if I forgot that right, and the one to the east of that, which would be beside Moab under Canvas, and the potential parcels that are there. Michael and Kuso, I think Michael Scarda, sorry, the name's wrong. Michael Scarda was one of those ones that I think has made an application previously. We wanted to have a bit of dialogue around what you see as potential options for development. The resort special one doesn't have really a strong resort potential in it. If you look at the way the concept plan is developed, it really seems to try to focus on a gateway presence, a scenic corridor presence. It seems to have elements of tourist destination in it, even though it doesn't say that. We wanted to have maybe a general dialogue on how the commission are viewing that, and Elisa might want to add something to that as well.
Yeah, we looked at the resort special zone, and we kind of, we understand the basic guidance there in that what is permitted in that zone is, low density residential, 1 unit or up to 1 unit per 5 acres. Permitted uses also include educational uses, such as field research stations. And then you have like the commercial kind of uses, which are really limited to restaurants, bars, theaters. And then you have the retail oriented, like, which I think is slightly vague, but it's personal service oriented and other sales oriented. So it's, it's understood that there's kind of there's definitely like it's geared towards more of a commercial retail type development along that corridor versus, I guess what we want to confirm is that, that like intensive residential development is probably not the intention out there, but that would be something we'd want to hear confirmation of. And then just also kind of in the spirit of that scenic resource protection district, would something that resembles low impact, like camping RV type development, which would bring on an OAO application, would that even be something that could fit into the spirit of that area? So that's just kind of where we're trying to get some clarification.
And maybe that's too open-ended for the commission to think about, but we could bring back some strategies, maybe a little more firm regarding this. It's got a lot of potential as a gateway, obviously, where that node is and how that's going to be affecting the state park. There is a fair bit of kind of random camping that happens in the area, if you can call it that. Some of those areas might be a lot more regulated and enforced as the state park starts to develop too. So that'll push people into different types of camping options, I guess, and maybe thinking about how those can be housed. I know Reed's objectives is to kind of capture that audience that's out there right now. And Michael Scarda had an application, I think, that he said historically, I talked to him last week, that had a resort commercial component in it that didn't seem to gain much traction. So now he's got something that's got much more of a small lot residential development, so long-term residential. The resort commercial is kind of strange because it's actually got a strong residential component in it too. So I think I know we got to rework our zones much better than they are right now. The highway commercial zone, as you know, has a big residential component, and you're not mandated to put commercial in, which is kind of strange. So and there's no mixed use there. So part of the goal is to get our land use strategy organized and the land use code aligned, but we're not there yet, and we still have people knocking on the door. So that small area plan, I think, was initiated last fall, and we're not sure exactly, Elisa and I, how that was kind of decided on and what its main objectives were. But we were thinking that it's mainly focused around the idea that you want to try to maintain a good appearance when you're coming into the county itself, and to focus on something that has a kind of scenic representation or a tourism destination, and the retail components that Lisa just mentioned. But beyond that, what is the residential kind of view of things? We're thinking more short-term residential, but OAOs, as you know, are basically prohibited in the county. So it could be that it was leading into something that's basically been prohibited.
So a little bit of context about, or historical context for that specific plan and the development in the area. We have had a history of applications coming before us in that corridor area. And at the time, 18 months ago or so, the Planning Commission went to the County Commission and said, before we start to take on some of these projects, we want to actually be able to look at it holistically, because we didn't want to be assessing individual projects on an ad hoc basis without having a clear strategy for development in that area. And that's where the County Commission directed us to take time to conduct this small area plan work, which is what came out of it is what we have today. It's a very difficult area, because on the one hand, you do have existing development, including commercial development. It is a major intersection to recreational facilities. And of course, it's the northern gateway into the community. So some of the things that came out of conversation with the County Commission and then were ultimately included in this, The first was interest by the county commission to maintain the airport area or even potentially north to Crescent Junction as the area for commercial or industrial development opportunities. So that is one specific directive that they gave the planning commission that we brought into our work. There was general consensus from the community that they did not want to introduce Moab and the residential areas of Grand County as tourist first, or tourism first, I should say. And I'm saying that delicately, but this came up over and over and over again in our meetings, in our conversations, and in our surveys, that there was this interest in thinking about the gateway, not just as a literal gateway to our amenities and our commercial development and so on, but as an introduction into sort of the ethics of the town. Ethics is the wrong word, but the sort of the character of the town. And actually, I think Josie may have been who introduced that into the conversation, and ultimately it was adopted into our vision statement. So there was this deep interest in inviting people in to this Grand County Moab community, but doing it in a way that reflected community values and not just current development patterns. And so when we look at the types of projects that were adopted into this resort special zone, it reflected back on that larger vision. Things such as residential development was discussed, and generally there wasn't a resistance to it, but there was a resistance to it being nightly rentals or short-term accommodations, and certainly a heightened emphasis on development, any sort of development being ecologically, structurally sound and sustainable, and both from a usage perspective as far as landscaping, water availability, sewer, and so on, but also recognizing that as our gateway, we wanted people to be introduced to the beautiful natural area that place is, and it's often sort of underappreciated at the per project conversation. And that is where this scenic protection plan came, that is partnered with it, but not coupled to it, that we saw that as an opportunity for us to identify some of these more sensitive areas in the county where we were open to some sort of development, but we wanted that development to be respectful of and respective to the sort of distinct characteristics of that scenic shed. And so that's, it is some that I think, generally speaking, if there is interest or openness to development in that area, there's a expectation that it is highly intentional, heightened standards, and that we are very, very critical about reflecting it back on the community. And the last thing I'll say related to some of the individual development projects that have been proposed for that area, some of the things we've heard is, well, there's a lot of, illegal camping in the area, and this will create a supply of that, and it'll reduce the impact. I'll just anecdotally share, because it's useful context. At the time that we were considering one of those projects, I actually went out and I interviewed people who were currently illegally camping out in that area. And about 2/3 of them said they did not have any interest in staying in a campground, that they were there because they wanted to escape the crowds, because they liked the fact that they could camp and be out in the open, but they liked the access to the trails. There were some people who said that they would be willing to stay in a campground, but for cost, or they were willing to use campground facilities for things like showers. But there isn't a lot of evidence that the issue is a lack of supply. That is the case for some people, but it's definitely not the case for all. And I'll just, on a personal note, say, I would need to see a lot more evidence that we could offset high impact, overnight stays through this sort of development before I'd be on board with us going full bore. I think we have a lot of anecdotal gut feels and not a lot of evidence that supply is really the issue there. So that's a lot of context, but hopefully gives a little bit of a story of sort of the conversations that went in and were adopted. But Josie, OB, anyone else who would like to comment on that process, please fill in the gaps I left open.
Well, I might just say, I think that's a good summary. Obviously, very interested in visual impacts, development back from the road, so it isn't right up on the road. I think it was a very deliberate of the Planning Commission at the time, and lots of discussion when they basically said, well, it doesn't have to be range and grazing, but maybe we could have resort special. And the fact that it was one a residence per 5 acres was key, I think, in that discussion. So not kind of seeing, let's say, small lot residential, which is kind of the density that you might expect in the city. So there was a feeling of let's leave it kind of open, back from the road if possible. Don't block the ridge line if possible. I think that was very deliberate. I believe I actually, when one of these things came up for camping, I actually voted for it. Of course, it has to get through the overnight overlay thing. Very, very tough kind of decision. And of course, context laden, going to be not very visible from the road, et cetera. But yeah, I think that the idea was to try to leave that area not just as it is, but remember that resort special, much of the stuff is already resort special. There's highway commercial. Nobody's saying that that's going to get rezoned. Range and grazing is even probably less dense and developable. And I think probably people who ask for a zone change could do that, and it would fit with the plan as I recall the plan.
So development really that has a low impact footprint, development footprint. So some green ideas potentially that could fit in well, some development standards. When you say back from the road, that's kind of counterintuitive when you think about Gateway, because Gateway's got more of a presence that has an invitation to it. So it's really not service road oriented. It may be something that's of course safe. You'd want that, but something that's got more of a traffic calming effect potentially. Although your speed limits there, I think are 60, 65 miles an hour. So, and getting traffic to slow down even at the airport is kind of difficult. And so that low impact development kind of idea, Bob, is that?
Yeah, and I mean, even what you sent us, there is this thing of, I can't remember the exact wording, but try to develop back away when possible. You're exactly right about traffic calming. I know that when I was in Eugene, there was a lot of talk about, when you have trees over a road, it slows people down. So it wouldn't probably calm traffic speeds as an introduction.
Yeah.
But yeah, low impact and not invisible, but not so visible that it takes over.
Yeah, I would add that I feel like the term gateway can be tricky because I think that means a lot of different things to different people. And I think in this scenario, it seemed like gateway kind of meant more of like a natural gateway and not necessarily an amenities gateway. Obviously, there still is potential for amenities, but I think that's not the focus. And when we had surveys answered by the community, the overwhelming response was that people wanted to see the least amount of development possible in that corridor. And so I think that was really kind of a baseline. With Reed's application, that really was a tough application, I know, for me as a commissioner, because it did feel like a sound project in and of itself. But I think there were a couple things at play. And one, I think, is a hesitancy in general, and not just in that specific case, to add extra overnight accommodations capacity at this point. I think there's a lot of hesitation as to whether we can actually absorb any sort of growth in that sector. And then I think, equally for that corridor, I know generally people would rather see very little development. So I think that the tricky thing that we've been trying to balance is, the rights of developers and property owners in the area versus that kind of community desire to have very little impact. And I think with Reed's project specifically, especially given a lot of our affordable housing conversations as of late, I would be interested at conversation around like long-term RV park potential. I don't know if that's something that we would want in that area. I think the other thing with that area in residential is there's so many other factors, including water and resources, and also just transportation plans for people who are then driving into town from that area as commuters. So yeah, those are things that I can think of to add on.
Okay. So that's good. So do you think a long-term housing, that reference I think was made in one of the planning commission meetings. I think it was the last one that Reed was in, and Michael Scarda might have been there at the same time. There was a reference to providing housing potentially for the state park and for people that work at the airport. And I think those two references were made to the commission at the time.
Yeah, those
So-
sound like really promising discussion topics for that.
And the only thing I'd add is, of course, we actually segregated off the area of the airport. I guess real, housing, if there's actually water enough out there, would still be a possibility in that area, and wouldn't, involve this plan. But it's further away from Moab, but it's closer to work.
If that's how it develops, things don't always turn out the way you'd like them to turn out, of course.
Yeah, and I might add, sorry, Emily, I was just thinking the other thing on top, just in that conversation is I also feel like it's important to keep in mind the presence of Sitla in this conversation, and the really large amount of Sitla land out there, and they've made it pretty clear kind of what their possible development ideas out there would be, which would be sort of much higher end, low density, high cost, I think is what they call it. So essentially like second homes. And so that is a kind of a frustrating consideration that, other landowners are possibly being really limited by the commission. And then they might have Sitla as a neighbor just getting to do whatever they want.
I would only add to that. I always think about Sitla, and Sitla may or may not be able to do what they want with land. I will only mention the city where on Lyons back, they decided, they would do this expanded plan, which was about twice what their original plan was. The city loses a suit on whether this was a major change in the plan or not a major change. A major change in the plan. And from my perspective, Sitla could have said, if they really have the right to do anything they want on Sitla land, like make a 10-story building down at the university, they could have said, well, we're going with the plan anyway. We don't need Grand County, the city, to follow this plan. They did not do it. I'm not sure they want a court case. And my own personal opinion is we make these rules for Grand County, and we will see if Sitla wants to follow those rules. And if they don't, we may have to go to court at some point. They may not want to go to court, but that's, one personal opinion.
Yeah, I'll just cap my comments here in saying anywhere in that northern corridor where there was anything that was meant to be a housing development is just going to be so expensive. It makes me very concerned about the ability to build attainable housing, let alone affordable housing that's actually something that the workforce can use and take advantage of. Not to mention the lack of transportation and other services in that area. And so with that in mind, any interest I would have in housing development in that area would need to be coupled with a very clear plan for how to make that housing something that can be built in such a way that the local workforce, local residents can actually benefit from. I know that one of the parcel owners in there has loosely proposed, they never brought anything official around like a tiny home community. Maybe there's a there. I won't say that, I'm against housing anywhere, but I do want to make sure that we don't let the tail wag the dog, and that any projects that would be framed as being for locals would have to have a higher burden of demonstrating ahead of time that it actually could be built out in such a way that it could be attainable by locals. And so that for me is the biggest asterisk around any interest in residential housing development in that area of any size or density. The other side of it is there will be additional development in that area because of the number of interested stakeholders, some of whom, such as Sitla, are not beholden directly to Grand County's land use code. But I don't think that should be a reason for us to justify additional services or justify additional development. I'd really like to see us be very, very intentional, especially in our more ecologically vulnerable and special areas in the county, and look towards building density and building opportunities closer to the city center. So that just sort of caps my comments, but yeah.
Okay, that's very helpful. Lisa, did you have anything else that you
I
wanted
was
to
just
ask?
gonna say, yeah, that all of your feedback is very helpful for us to understand that area better. And thank you for all of your discussion around that.
I'd like to just throw in just my observation, because I was, when we had, I think, our only application come through to, in this area, it was Reed Pendleton's. I had to recuse myself. My wife was on she was on the architecture, or she was the company. Sorry, words. She was the architect for that project. So I had recused myself. And so I was purely just a fly on the wall. And what I heard from, it was at least 2, maybe 3 planning commissioners here, was that his project was like ideal, what they wanted. And it was my opinion, or what my observation, that what led to many denials was the element of having the UTV rental component, because I think he wanted to increase a couple number of his rentals. And so I only share that to say that I think, as far as going through the process and what had been envisioned up there, I wonder it might have gotten passed if there wasn't this increase in UTV rentals. So I just share that was my perspective. It seemed like take the UTVs out of the equation, and that might have been more what was kind of the vision for being, that location being used for, that area. So just my observation.
Okay, well, it looks like the commission's had a fairly vested interest in this whole area. Not that you don't have vested interest in the rest of the county, of course, but it is a focal area, definitely coming into to the city and the county.
Before we fully wrap this up, I do just want to separate this question around the Scenic Resource Protection District. So the intent there was to see it as a toolbox that we could expand in additional parts of the county. I don't think it requires deeper discussion today, but it is, along with all of these big picture things that we're looking at right now, that is one that I think it would be helpful to narrow down as a tool that we can use to elevate the standards and potentially protect specific areas of the county where we might be interested in seeing some development, but we want to make sure that it is in line with its surroundings, because we have such drastic differences between, the city boundary South 191 out to Cisco and Crescent Junction. I mean, having that tool, I hope it's one that we wield and wield creatively.
Yeah, in our land use analysis that we're proposing, I think we've touched base with you, is to actually take a look at exactly that, is to get ahead of the curve and look at where development should occur, where it's sensitive. Scenic corridor references and design standards are pretty intensive types of planning tools, as you probably know, that bring in that reference point to both the aesthetic and the impact that's there, where the urban levels of development could occur based on services and ecology. Obviously, that's a big one, environment too, and how that relates to both the national parks and public lands. It was a tough one to work with, but we want to make sure we're mutually planning as best we can, and the city and the fringes around the city too. So it really is a growth management tool, a good long-range land use plan, tied in with a good transportation plan and infrastructure plan. I'm making it sound simpler than it is, but that's the kind of thing that you really do in a good long-range land use planning, is to actually show where growth should go and where it shouldn't go. So we're going that direction, getting there from here to there, or moving along from where we are, and that we've done some things. It's hard to reverse those types of things once they've started. And so making wise decisions, of course.
All right. Any other comments, or should we move on to our next topic? All right. DRT.
Okay. Yeah, so we had I'm going to give this, I think I'm going to give it to Elisa. Aren't I, Elisa? Yeah, I am.
Yeah, I'll just start out with the two projects that were kind of the smaller scale ones, and then I'll hand it over to John to talk about Cane Creek a little bit more. At our DRT Development Review Team meeting on August 4th, we had representatives from the Sky Retreat. A project they're proposing is it's out at Westwater, so it's pretty far out, actually closer probably to have more connection with Grand Junction in terms of folks traveling to go to the grocery store or any kind of amenities. They would have more probably an impact on that route versus coming into Moab for anything. So it's way out there. The idea is kind of an off-grid concept, dark sky, astronomy, educational retreat for roughly 20 to 25 visitors would be like the max occupancy, and some small cabins. We were able to provide, with the different entities that were at that, that need to sign off on that proposal. They were given some feedback. The project representatives were given feedback on kind of some of the issues that going forward, but it seems like they are going to want to move their application forward. So we'll be looking at that a little bit more. The other one is in towns on the south end of Highway 191, which is a relocation for the Oars Canyonlands warehouse. They're moving their, I think this is what I understand, is that they're moving their operations to this new property off of Highway 191, and it would basically be the construction of a large warehouse to support their operations. They were also given some really productive feedback in terms of the impacts that would have. And this is just so you know, kind of the general location. It's across from Sage Creek development off that's kind of next to Mesa Road. And so that also looks like it will be moving forward with our review, of course.
Okay, if I could take the Cane Creek just to familiarize you, you've probably heard this enough already, but there's a number of lots in there. The potential build out potentially is 1,500 units if they took all the density that they wanted, residential units in different types of forms. The first parcel is the one that's kind of it's got an overnight accommodation overlay that's actually stuck. So that's right at the beginning of the Cane Creek area where the campground is. That one has got entitlements already. They're moving ahead with some of their open space assessment, trails connectivity, kind of layout. They've got an option to purchase. They don't actually own the land, the current potential applicant. The rest of Cane Creek has got a lot of challenges, as we know. One of them is the road and services. We had the power guy with Rocky Mountain Power, I think it is, that was there talking about the services. Gas is already out there. High pressure gas runs along the side of the cliff of all places. And the power potential is there and it can be tapped into fairly easily. The other two major services are sewer and water, and those would both be significant package plants that would be in the area. They did meet with the state the next day. I'm not sure what the results of that were. I've not heard back from Craig, the applicant, or from Jeff Pillis, the engineer. But that's one of those things, obviously, they need the standards, the state standard for sewer and water. And those are big numbers. And not only that, they have to provide both an ongoing operations plan and certification plan for any operators that are there and how that's going to work within our development models, especially with groundwater and sewer. So as Dave Dillman, our engineer, highlighted, that's one of those areas that tends to get into a lot of trouble if it's not managed right at the beginning and can much controlled over time. from an operations perspective. The water right is already there, so they still need to prove water, make sure that's all working. I think that aquifer has been tested and everything, and it's already proved the potential that's there. They've stepped this back to 1,200 to 500 units from, I think, the original transportation traffic impact assessment is actually looking at 1,500. The road design needs some attention. It's fairly narrow, but most straight sections like that, as long as you're not putting intersections in, will do very well with that type of traffic impact. The real failures occur usually on a left turn or an intersection. And I think the one left turn coming back into the city where it's scoring probably a C or C minus is probably one of the toughest areas. So it's usually that left turn movement that's usually where the failure occurs, or the failures start to occur. So the road, I understand the county is interested in applying, I think it's called a FLAP grant, which is the federal grant. It's rated pretty highly, I understand, federally. So that's part of its, seems to be moving ahead. And Bill Jackson's kind of involved with that because it's more than just a service road. It's a county road and a collector. So it'll have a fair bit of traffic on it. And then the other concerns are really related to the floodplain and backfilling and bringing in structural fill for a fairly significant amount of land. And that's all been at least lined up within the plan itself. So we basically sent them a way to think through how they're going to be presenting that, and phasing. That's another big question. Phasing and timing, how that time could work. Not that you ever can nail that down completely. What does their core product look like? How do they want it to unfold over time? Is the full infrastructure going to go in at the same time? How is that staging going to work as far as the development agreement is concerned and servicing? Of course, there's bonding involved with all of that too. And there's the trail connectivity and the open space and stormwater management. So it's, it's pretty significant development over time. We've been working on this for at least 5 years now. So they're looking at, we basically accepted as far as a preliminary application is concerned. They paid their money, of course, which is always important. And they're moving ahead with the state review and analysis. And then each one of our development review team members are evaluating the potential and how that works together. So they've got a fair bit of homework to do yet before they come back to the table, or before you see anything. This is basically going to be an entitled project. So there's no rezonings involved, at least planned so far. I should say that. They've asked about some of the potential for overnight accommodation overlay. And I don't think there's a lot of potential there, but they've asked about that. They've talked a little bit about workforce housing and those options that they would have moving ahead within the area. They're exploring different commercial opportunities in the area too, not just with Cane Creek, but hopefully buying into the neighborhood. At least that's the way they're presenting the project. So very involved, very complicated, a large number of units over time for the size of a county. So those were the three. We have two more. I don't know. We'll leave that for the next meeting. I don't think there's anything that we want to highlight beyond that. Is there, Lisa?
Well, the only other kind of follow-up that I think Emily had requested that we talk about, but there's really no update on, is the possible apartment complex that was proposed at our previous DRT meeting that would be next to USU, adjacent to the USU campus, future campus, and that we're still
Really
waiting.
quick, sorry, Elisa, before we move on to that, I want to just stay on this Cane Creek one just for a moment, because there were some questions that came up in the chat and looked like Rick had a comment to make. And I just want to make sure if there's any questions around anticipating impact that we should be looking at now, that these are addressed by the body so we have time to respond. So Makeda, Josie, and then Rick, I saw your hand raised as well.
I would just post in the chat because I didn't feel like it was necessary to inject in that moment. But I'm just curious what options we have as far as like a scenic resource protection district, similarly to what you said happened on 313 and 191. I was not on the commission at that point, but just considering the number of pretty upset county residents that have talked to me about this, I don't know much about, again, I was not part of that process, but you said there was applications coming in and you guys were able to kind of visit or hit the pause button on those applications to kind of visit what's happening in that area. And that is just a pretty important area to a lot of people. So I think it would be worth taking some time for, but that's all.
And critically, the projects in the Northern Corridor were all legislative decisions, which gave us the ability to determine when to bring those on. If this is entitled, I don't know what tools we would have.
Okay.
But I do think it's worth having this conversation, not being a scenic byway like we have with 128, and being a very important, cultural, emotional, and aesthetic importance to the county. John or Lisa, what is your assessment on our ability to review this for a potential scenic district and make any recommendations to the commission ahead of time in anticipation of a very large development?
Okay, let me just make sure I'm on the right page here. We're going back to Highway 313 and 191.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No?
This is related to the Cane Creek.
Oh,
potential
Cane Creek.
development
Okay.
On Cane
Oh,
Creek, but looking at that pool.
Okay, yeah. So one of the things I didn't mention was we did talk to them about public outreach and public engagement, even though technically, as you mentioned, it's not a legislative decision. But that highway actually has got a lot of federal potential in it, and there is a public engagement component that's part of that. So, and I think that's pretty well mandated by the grant funding mechanism that's there. Yeah, that scenic corridor protection one, it's almost backwards planning to try to catch up to this. It is a funny zone. A highway commercial zone, as I mentioned before, is a funny zone to have in that area and have it assigned, especially the way that highway commercial zone works. It is hard to play catch up with something that's already there. We could put development standards in place, and that's one of the objectives that we would shoot for all the scenic corridors. This area has got a very high value as far as recreational use. People have been using the area, very appealing in a lot of cases as far as resource access is concerned. Backcountry access, really important as well. So it's got a lot of values in it and a lot of historical values, but we don't have a lot of scenic protection or resource protection that's there currently. And trying to catch up to that's difficult. I think we can do a lot of persuading and a lot of discussion around this. There might be a quid pro quo at some stage that does involve a legislative process. We haven't come to that point yet, but we talked about trade-offs and what those could look like, especially with workforce housing. But we really haven't come to terms with some of that. They're thinking about how that could be managed and addressed. Density is always one of those questions. I think they know they've got the density in their hand. The other question is whether they can do short-term rental. And that's the other one they've kind of not necessarily thrown down, but they've at least touched on. So that would be a legislative change, obviously. So,
Okay, so they're not even prioritizing necessarily like full-time residences. They don't know if they're going to try and do overnights or not yet.
no, they're not. Overnight accommodation is not on the table right now. So
Okay, but you said they mentioned that being interest.
that's the quid pro quo question. If we did this, what could we do for you?
Gotcha.
With their current situation, they have the overlay for campgrounds applied, but they wouldn't get they wouldn't
No.
be entitled to any additional type of OAO development. So if they
No.
wanted to do nightly rentals, they would need to come to the county and petition for that specific
That's right.
overlay.
Does that help? I'm not sure if that helps.
Well, at a just higher level, I'd be very curious to hear a little bit more about just some of the conversations that have been happening with them. This is an area where knowing that this is an entitled project and knowing they're open to working with the county, I'd love to even consider a presentation by them to the body as soon as it's not just reasonably possible, but also that it would make sense and that it would be the responsible thing to do. Is I know that there's higher conversations happening right now. Given the amount of community attention on this project and in that area, the sooner that we can be starting dialogue, the better, so that we as a body are in a position to make strong community supported recommendations to the county commission, and that the developer is in a position to be able to respond to them without feeling like they're on guard. And so we can keep relationships good and moving us towards community driven development. So
I think they'd love to speak to you, Emily. They'd absolutely love to speak to commission. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think they'd want to pitch their development and the options that are there too. So I think that's probably a good opportunity for them to kind of open the door for public engagement. They may be surprised at some of the pushback, of course, but that's the nature of development.
Well, as long as we are, I mean, I'm sure this is already being discussed, but clear that, presenting to the body isn't necessarily the way to get any sort of, certainly no decision, and that, any commissioner would be free to withhold their opinion on this project. And also, I realize there would be citizen attention, and we just want to manage that effectively. But planning commissioners, are we open to extending an invitation to that developer to speak to us at our next meeting?
I like the idea. We've had people do this kind of thing before. The question is, would citizens be allowed to ask some questions? I mean, I guess that's in the negotiation with the folks who are presenting.
We would have citizens to be heard as a time where people could make comments, but it wouldn't be a public hearing. So there wouldn't be any citizen comment directly tied to the presentation.
We could frame this a bit more constructively, not that you're not suggesting it's destructive, of course, Emily, but we could frame this constructively as far as opening the door to public engagement and what that strategy would look like, how it could be presented. And it might be a bit hasty to do that at the next meeting. I was hoping to do a workshop at the next meeting, by the way. So maybe the meeting in September might be better. They would have a lot more of their phasing plan thought through, and some of the servicing elements thought through.
That's a good point. We're going to have a long day next time. So
yeah.
Let's do that. Let's extend an invitation to them in our first September meeting. We'll have our new planning commissioner on with us by then as well. And I'm eager to hear more about their vision. So perfect.
I just think it's so encouraging that they're wanting to work with the community. Recently, I know for me, for most of my life, anytime I hear development, particularly, I mean, I love that corridor. That's just so near and dear to my heart. And I hear, development anywhere, my hackles go up, knee-jerk reaction, no more development. It was really illuminating for me. I recommend a book, Billionaire's Wilderness, if anyone's heard of it. Talks about Jackson Hole and how they have 97% of their land up there is publicly owned. And so that's what has put land at a premium up there. And, knowing that we're at 87% here, and this is a vested property or it's, from what I'm gathering, I'm not sure where they're at with things. They have their property rights and we have limited stock. And if we just always say no to everything because of our knee-jerk reactions, it just means that what is available, it becomes more of a premium. And I don't know. It's
like a pretty special project though, Steve.
Sorry.
Let's withhold any discussion about the project until we actually have a public hearing. So, but I do appreciate everybody's comments, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the developer. Let's go ahead before we move on, only because it's set in our schedule. I don't see anybody on here for citizens to be heard, but it is 5 o'clock. So if anyone was hoping to join, now is your chance. We'll just give this half a second and then we'll move on to our next topic. All right. Not seeing anybody chomping at the bit. So I know we already raised the joint meeting. I raised the joint meeting topic. So I don't know how much additional time you need to spend here, John, but is there anything else related to these joint commission meetings that you would like to discuss with us or get any action on?
No, anything, that the commission can put together, if it's now, or send us an email if you'd like, on mutual areas that you think are challenging. I know we've heard some of them. We know some of them too. But if there's anything that you want to pinpoint between any one of the jurisdictions, that would be one of our goals. The other goal that we would want, which is not listed here, would be with SITLA potentially, and with other public lands, BLM, National Park, and State Park.
Mm-hmm. Let's just quick roundtable if anything's top of mind, and then I'll circulate an email to collect additional input. Any big ticket items that the commission would be interested in meeting with the City Planning Commission on, or the San Juan County Planning Commission, knowing that these would be recommendations up to the larger body?
I've listed 4 there, mutual planning, transportation master plan, land use, trails, housing, enforcement, economic development. Any project discussions could occur. We could do these on a fairly regular basis, like annual basis might be enough. regional planning initiatives, general plan and land use code updates. Obviously, it's a lot of overlap. Housing study and workshop, we need to work through that as well. And then we're at the others question, which is the question you're asking.
Well, I'll raise one that only just really became up this year, and that is looking at the Spanish Valley flood master plan. As you know, with the fire up in the mountains, we're at heightened risk for flood, and my neighborhood just suffered actually a ton of flood, and I know it affected parts of San Juan County as well. With increased development, and of course the risk from fire, this is only going to become a bigger issue. So that's one. It's more tactical, but I would find value from a mutual planning project there, assessing the current master plan, and also just looking at, there's a number of projects in there that had been slated to be done, but I don't know their status, and that I'm going to tuck away for a future consideration item. With the city, I think specifically the southern boundary to the so that Mill Creek area, University area. I know the city has expressed interest in annexation. There's been some conversation about development nodes. I'm very, very eager to get with the City Planning Commission and understand what their goals are for that boundary and how we might use that for common planning and also just common goals.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that mutual annexation area, potentially what that looks like and what the city's thinking. Of course, that's always a great subject for discussion.
I would like to add the topic of water, and that may be implied already within the list, but it's definitely in my interest to work together with the other local government bodies, especially around just looking at our water supply and discussions of pulling water from the Colorado River, which I know Grand Junction is doing now, and I think it's a terrible precedent to set personally. And I know that there are other communities setting a precedent of at least putting a moratorium on new development until water can really be figured out. And so I think I would really love to take a really big top-down view of water as it relates to all future development in Grand County, in Moab City, in Spanish Valley.
And I would second that. It is interesting. I believe Grand Junction and water right people down the valley told them to stop. I think they eventually did stop. But it's a great topic because, we have some claim on Colorado River water, but would we actually be able to ever use it? Of course, it's costly, and there are people downstream that expect 7.5 million acre feet of water for the lower part of this Colorado River water. So it'd be great to get some views on that.
So with this in mind, I will draft an email and circulate it. So if anyone has any comments that they can contribute, or John, if you would prefer that staff drafted it and we help to revise it, we can talk about that this week. And then if anybody has any additional items that they'd like to raise, just send them by email and then we'll get that constructed. But anything we can do to work with our neighbors, the better off we all are.
Yeah, I think just a list of your issues, we can put this together, frame it together in a single page, and then do an introduction. What are you thinking as far as if this is appealing to you? And I'm assuming it'll be appealing to them, the other partners. What do you think would be a good time? I'm thinking late October, and maybe that's too far away. I don't know. But that way we can schedule and get some of our draft policies going, some of the projects kind of vetted, and hopefully have a draft of the general plan ready.
That's what I'd tie it to. Yeah.
So late October sound like a mutual time to at least meet with the city commission. I'm not sure if we want to do all three at the same time. San Juan County Commission, they're fairly close, I think. Yeah, actually, I'm not sure how far that commission stretches. I'm sure the whole county, but I think a lot of the commission members are right in the Spanish Valley area. You must know them all, Emily. Don't you rub shoulders with those San Juan people?
Yes, we all know each other. We check our mail together at the one.
There you go.
I actually, so I'll just raise for myself, but I'm curious to hear from anyone else. I would prioritize San Juan County if we could find the interest on their end. Only because I do think that there is a lot of common communication already at the city county level that we can benefit from. But San Juan County, I mean, they are dealing with some big opportunities and big issues in their northern part of the county. And I'm blind to them. And I'd be very curious to get that conversation as soon as possible. Does anyone else have a different opinion on which we might prioritize over the other?
Emily, I think I'm in agreement with you. I mean, I think both are great. And I know that county and city work a lot together. I would love to see a little bit more of a formalized process around that. But I do think that the San Juan County conversation is really long overdue, so that we're playing more catch up on. And I do think that development in Southern Spanish Valley is such a sleeping giant. And I feel like most people just don't know what's coming down the pike. So I would agree.
So let's ask staff to help us construct that introduction, see if we can prioritize that for October. I personally can take both. I think we can handle both conversations, but that's the one I would place before the other. And we'll ask staff just to keep us in the loop there about progress in those conversations.
Okay, sounds great. Okay,
Fabulous.
the last thing I think we had on the agenda, at least I thought it was on the last thing on the agenda, was the workshop on August 23rd. I've started to draft the general plan. I'm hoping to take a big swing at this thing this week and get a lot of the policy background framework together for all the elements, and then start to merge the plans that we currently have on the docket, and then put a strong implementation strategy together that kind of identifies what current plans we have, public engagement strategy, starting to immerse the strategic plan from the county into the front part of that. There'll be some ragged edges, of course. And then talk about public engagement as kind of the second part of the beginning element of the general plan. Laura's being very helpful and working together with us on that. So steering committee recommendations will come out of that. We get a steering committee meeting on this Thursday. So we're hoping to have a little more discussion around that framework and timing is concerned. And then the other thing is the land use strategy RFP, as I mentioned before. It's bringing that up and going over some of those elements in the workshop. That would hopefully be out for public proposals next week. And there is a timetable there. The goal would have the timetable and finalized by the third week in September. And the delivery would be by the end of next year, kind of paralleling the transportation plan, which is normally what you want to do with land use anyway. And that would hopefully vet a lot of this through a public engagement process as well. So the goal would be to actually update the general plan from the top down and then reinform it with the new transportation plan and the new land use strategies, as well as starting to do in earnest public outreach and community association engagement, stakeholder engagement, including planning commissions over the next year and a half. And that would reinform the updated general plan. So that's kind of the timetable. It is ambitious. We have a potential planning charrette planned for the third week in September, which we're still shooting for. And that would involve 4 or 5 different presentations, including hopefully the transportation part of it. It would be too early for the land use one to be done. We might have to push that back a bit, but we should have some framework there that we can actually start to talk about. The other thing I like to take a look at is good 3D visualization. So we've got more kind of visual tools that we're using rather than just text-based. So we start to take a look at streetscapes, scenic corridors, what those could look like, what not only what they kind of what the reference point to land use code is, but also what they feel like. And there's a lot of jurisdictions that are using 3D visualization a lot more than they used to. In fact, a lot of those are embedded in codes nowadays, not just text. Anyway, we should be going that direction as well, I think, just to get a better feel for what things are going to look like, and to avoid the strip mall look, especially at gateway areas, and to take a look at how lighting can be handled tastefully, street trees, and without impacting the water, low impact development, what that looks like and feels like too. We don't have a lot of good examples. I think we could have a lot more. So anyway, that's kind of what the workshop is focusing on. We won't have a lot of meaty things there too, but I'm hoping to have at least basically a draft of the general plan. That might be a bit promising, but we'll see how it goes.
One quick note just on format. I'm going to make this a bit of a game time decision on whether we meet virtually or in person, depending on what happens over the next couple of weeks with community spread. And I will ask if we do meet in person that we will have masks required, just so that people feel comfortable attending and that we have the ability to, maintain our safety while also having in-person time if it allows for it. And I'll be asking the county staff to keep us appraised of their recommendation there. So just want to call that out. At this point, we'll have it in person if we can, or in a hybrid model, but just, we'll leave that up to the fates. John, I think just maybe next week, it would be useful to get a draft agenda just broken out by how you want to structure the time. And the sooner we can get documents so people have time to review them, the better. With this very ambitious timeline, I anticipate some concern and have heard some concern from the community around citizen involvement and citizen outreach. Can we plan on just having a slightly more detailed, even if it's just an addendum to our packet, laying out this timeline and when that involvement happens and what it looks like? Because again, I think this is one that this county is doing just a fabulous job of actively seeking input from the community, but I also know it's a bit out of sight, out of mind with our current circumstances. So,
yeah. So we don't, in planning, as you know, it's early and ongoing engagement. So we do need to get out. It'd be nice if we could actually physically meet a lot more strategically than we are. But our goal is to actually have a really watershed public engagement exercise in September that brings a lot of ideas forward. And these are ideas. They're meant to be kicked around. They're meant to be discussed. And there'll be a lot of voices there, we're hoping. And that's the goal. What happens between now and then, of course, is really not cast in stone. It's all malleable. It's all policy oriented in a lot of ways. It's meant to be draft. It's meant to be there for discussion. The implementation strategy kind of vets a lot of that out and tries to tie all of the major decision makers together in a group. We hope to draw the interview. We've interviewed about over 20 people so far. We're still missing some. Is to draw that group back together in a kumbaya moment sometime near the end of August. That might be a bit ambitious too. And then kind of talk through how they view some of the strategies, how they see it rolling out, what they have as far as their plans are concerned, because there's lots of gaps. And I think it's how those things unfold and what that timing is. So we can certainly draft something for the commission to see. Hopefully that we can get that to you next week, because there's not a lot of time between now and then. So we'll see how that goes. Laura is actually working on the narrative as far as the interviews are concerned. They need a lot more work too, and we're going to start to draft that. Jenna will be helping us hopefully with that narrative development too. And then we'll get our public engagement strategy firmed up a lot more and have you comment on that.
thank you. Anyone have any questions for staff or anything that they would like to make sure that we cover at the workshop that isn't represented in the outline we've been given? Great. Perfect. Well, we will stay in touch as far as format there, and then just circling back to the beginning of the meeting, any sort of notes, takeaways just from some of these outreach conversations, particularly with the county, I think would be valuable just for the commissioners to see raw, and then that way we can prep ourselves with questions and make sure that we're all sort of holding a common mental model for where things sit. All right. Anything else there before we move on to future considerations?
I wanted to mention, Emily, you have great art in your background.
Oh, thank you. This was my gift from my children from a birthday party that Art Coach facilitated. So I'm happy to show it off and grateful for our educators in Grant County. And me, of course. Similarities are striking. Wonderful. Well, actually, as we move into future considerations, OB, come off of mute again, because the two things that I'd love to just bring up, just to touch on briefly and then set up for future conversations. So the first is related to the land use code. Lisa has been going through and identifying opportunities for us to prioritize, to revisit, to clean up, to assess. And OB, I asked him on behalf of the Planning Commission to work with her there, just because we want to funnel input into a common point. So would love a quick update there. And then I also mentioned I'd love to just raise the stormwater drainage plan before we break.
So we actually haven't probably been in, Alicia and I, in communication on this. And I guess we ought to make sure that we do. I've been, of course, reading through it slowly. And it is the case that there's a lot of talk, especially in the introduction kind of general provisions, about making sure that the general plan and the land use code move in kind of hand in hand. So it will be interesting as we start the general plan, making sure that that kind of introduction focuses on the same kind of vision. And of course, after that, it's a matter of actually slowly changing the Luke to do what we adopt and of course what we're supposedly adopting is it at least uses the general plan as kind of a guidance for where we want to move. So I don't really have much of an update. The parts of that general plan I typically use, which is always very interesting, are probably sections 2, 3, and 5. And it is wonderful. Section 2, which really has to do with the establishment of districts. And then they actually have, of course, clicks where you can go and see, well, what's permitted, what's not permitted, let's say in SLR. And then in 5, what the design standards are. So probably everybody is aware of that, but it's really great, of course, when you're reviewing projects. I will start communicating with Alicia to see what she's got on her part of the loop.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Yeah, I look forward to working with you on that. I did send an email, I'm not sure if you received it recently, that just had a link to a Google Doc, a spreadsheet that I put up on Google Drive, so we can kind of have a live document to track all of the suggestions for the LUC changes. And it actually was I can't take credit for most of it. I'm just kind of resurrecting this spreadsheet that was created, I think, by Abby. And so there's some recommendations on there from back in the day, and then we're starting to add like the more recent input that we're getting from various folks. And so it's just kind of it's going to be like the central location for all of those changes that we want to see, and then we can kind of start prioritizing those within that spreadsheet.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both. I know reading the land use code is riveting entertainment, but for everyone else who is equally enthralled, please do submit things that you see. It is worth taking a read through. I mean, as you go through, you really do see the priorities of past governments and past sort of reflections of the community. And there are places where it really does feel misaligned to the spoken priorities of citizens that we've heard over the last several years of planning. So we'll ask everyone to just take a glance through it when you have a moment. ideally before our next workshop, because one of the things that I think is most valuable to our time and to staff's time is to give direction around those pressing issues that we think are those levers we talked about at our last one behind some of these more systemic opportunities and issues. Things like, the trade-off between citizen amenities, quality of life, and heightened development, and moving us on a path towards economic resilience and diversity. And that's not an easy trade-off, but if you read through the first part of the land use code, I think you might agree that it might not reflect the actual reality on the ground of what we're hearing from the community. So I highly recommend going through it. All right. Before I move on to my last thing, any other just future considerations, specifically coming back to our list of priorities that we talked about at the beginning of the year, that we talked about at our last workshop? I want to make sure that every member of the Planning Commission feels aligned to what the body is working on and engaged. If there's an area that they are particularly passionate about and want to be invested in, want to see us invest in as a body, just that those are out on the table and we all are on the same page about it. So just, you're welcome to email it later, but anyone just have anything else that they want to raise that they have not seen reflected in the workshop agenda, in our ongoing discussions or future considerations and so on.
Emily, can I just throw one thing out there that I forgot to mention? We are actually looking at a proprietary media platform for engagement we're looking at Bang the Table, and the other one was, Laura, Pinpoint or something?
Yeah, the other one is Social Pinpoint.
Social Pinpoint.
Yeah.
So we've looked around. Park City uses Bang the Table. There's a number of jurisdictions in Utah that do. Fort Collins, which I'm not sure, Emily, are you, depends what university you go to. I guess there's competition everywhere.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you,
my alma mater.
is it okay? So they use it too. I mentioned that to somebody the other day and they said, no, that's the wrong university. I don't remember who that was.
I helped write the original cluster study analysis for the city of Fort Collins. That was my foray into planning. Anyway, I'm sorry. Back to your point.
We're looking at, we have an invitation out to all the internal groups around that. So let's say, here's what we're thinking of doing. Do you have anything that you're thinking of doing that's similar? Because we don't want to do anything that's redundant. And we're just asking what they think the traction looks like. So Laura has kind of drafted an invitation for those comments, and hopefully we'll get something back. I'm not sure if we have anything yet, Laura, but we may want,
not quite,
no,
but
nothing yet.
maybe.
So we might have to beat the table. We haven't put the Bang the table and beat the bushes. So if there's anyone, maybe we might want to send it to Emily just to see if you want to send it to the commission members.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that.
Fabulous. And then I know ongoing conversation around our overlay zones that OB and Josie have been representing us on. Steve, at the start of the year, you brought up wanting to be more involved in citizen outreach, especially with developers. So I know that that's an area that you had noted as a priority. And I just, again, as we go through this planning process, if there are opportunities where we do interface with the public and that's something you'd like to lean into, don't want to volunteer anybody for time that they don't have. But I just want to make sure everyone does feel involved. So John and Elisa, I'll let you sort of engage us individually as you're seeing those opportunities. And Rick and Makeda, if there's areas you'd like to lean in, let them know as well. And that way we can share the load, carry more. Okay. Any last things here? Otherwise, I'll raise one last issue I wanted to just bring up and then we can go from there. All right. So last week with the storms that rolled through the Pat Creek drainage, we had some significant flooding and damage in the sort of Beeman Road down to Spanish Valley Drive, sort of that southern part of the county area. And at least some of that damage seems to be, or I'm not going to say damage, at least some of that flooding, some of the impact seems to have come from some of the infrastructure in the Pat Creek drainage. On the county side, but then there's also some issues on the San Juan County side. So I went through and I read the 2011 Spanish Valley Storm Drain Master Plan update this last weekend. Again, thrilling. But one of the things that I really stood out is there's a long list of projects that were proposed, and I don't know the status of them. Now, not all of them are critical. Not all of them were, certainly most of them weren't impacted by this most recent flooding. there's two things that come to mind. Well, three things. First is heightened risk of major climactic events just due to our changing climate patterns, some of which we've seen already starting to happen, some of which I think are unknown to us. The second is increased development in the area. There are some design standards and specific standards in the storm drain master plan, as well as in the land use code, but a lot of them tend to be focused on developments of 7,000 square feet or larger. And as individuals develop their lands, as we see subdivision and increased development, we are going to have more of this sort of non-porous or semi-porous type development that could change runoff patterns in the case of flood. And then of course we have the most recent forest fire event, which has made for major flooding risk coming down the Pat Creek area. The reason I raise this is, as we do look at the general plan, this is an area of major risk. It's an risk to personal property and value of property, flooding risk. As we've had our FEMA maps assessed, a lot of the flooding happened outside of that 100-year flood zone in our flooding maps. And of course, we just have the ability for transportation come, and we've now closed down Stocks Drive for several months because of the work that's needed to fix this. I would really love an update on which of these projects have been completed, which need to be completed, and which have been deemed as non-prioritized from maybe the roads department, I guess would be who would handle that. It doesn't need to be comprehensive, but this is an area that I am both personally affected by, but also just from a more principled level, very interested in the county making sure that we're accounting for, so that we aren't waiting for another major event before we look at the potential damage and costs. So is this something that I know we keep I keep piling things onto your plate, but is this something we could ask the roads department for an update on? And specifically, the tables begin on page 46 of this 2011 plan. And even just to kind of have a rundown of the status of these would be very helpful.
Yeah, that's rock star Bill Jackson, and he'd be quite willing, I'm sure, to speak for him, to be before commission. I don't know if he's done this before, but him and Bill Hulse, Bill is the floodplain administrator officially. Usually that's in the planning department, but I think he was there by default. I think he still wants to pass it back to the planning department, by the way. But Bill will really know where those projects are at and have a good idea around them and be able to address most of those. If he's not appeared before the commission before, it's a great idea.
Perfect. Well, if not our next meeting, then maybe the meeting after, but I would love to put a little bit of urgency on this so that we can account for it in any sort of long-term planning that we're currently working on.
Is there anything that he could do in writing maybe before that he could just give you an update on?
That's sufficient for me. I mean, if he'd like to come and speak to us, especially just as it relates to development patterns in the area and things that we should be aware of, I think it's a useful conversation. But even just to have a written update, which I'm sure is logged somewhere, I would find that very useful and would ask for that.
Okay, yeah, maybe that's the place I'll go first and just see what he says. Yeah. Okay,
all right. Well, thank you all for entertaining my mental checklist going into today's conversation. I look forward to our meeting in 2 weeks. Anything else that anyone wanted to raise? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Emily?
Yes.
This is Michael Bryant. I've kind of sat here the whole time, but I'd like to have a further conversation with John about the plat map stuff and administrative possibilities there. I believe Carbon County does it administratively. So John, if you and I want to get together, we can talk about that and find how they're doing it and what's working. So
okay, that's great, Michael. Thanks for doing that. Okay.
Thanks for speaking up, Michael. Sorry, I didn't mean to skip over there.
I'd like to move that we adjourn the meeting.
Fabulous. Is there a second? Seconded by Steve. All in favor?
Okay.
Unanimous. Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone. Have
Thanks.
a great evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.